The storm raged on, casting Seattle in shadows as a mother and child stood at the mercy of a cold, unforgiving night. In the midst of their struggle for survival, a single moment, a simple act of kindness, would change the course of their lives forever. What began as a desperate plea for help would soon unravel a journey neither of them could have ever anticipated. Subscribe now and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let this story sweep you away. The rain came down in sheets, cold and sharp, soaking Lily to the bone as she cradled Ethan against her chest. The small boy, his face pale from exhaustion, clung to her with the innocence only a child could possess. His small hands fumbled at her coat, seeking comfort, but there was little to offer. They had been walking for hours, the weight of the night pressing down on her fragile body, both physically and emotionally. Lily had never felt so lost, so desperate. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car that sped past without a second glance. She didn't expect anyone to stop. She didn't expect anything. But then, just as the world seemed to close in around them, a sleek black car slowed to a stop beside her. The window rolled down, revealing a man inside. He looked at her through the rain, his face unreadable, his eyes distant, almost cold. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Her heart raced as she glanced down at Ethan, who was too exhausted to understand the danger of the situation. "Do you need help?" the man asked, his voice low but with a hint of concern. Lily's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say yes, to ask him for something, anything that might offer relief from the nightmare they were living. But her pride, battered and bruised by years of hardship, held her back. She couldn't bring herself to trust someone so easily. But then she saw his eyes, and something inside her shifted. There was something about him, something that made her believe he wasn't like the others. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with quiet understanding. Or perhaps it was the desperate hope that clung to her like a lifeline. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. I just need a ride, a place to stay for the night." The man studied her for a moment longer, as if weighing something in his mind. Then with a slight nod, he opened the car door. "Get in," he said simply. Lily hesitated for only a moment before she stepped forward, cradling Ethan in her arms as she climbed into the back seat. She could feel his gaze on her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe in something more than survival. She allowed herself to believe in hope. As the car pulled away, the storm raging outside seemed to fade into the distance. Inside, the air was warm, and for the first time in a long while, Lily allowed herself to close her eyes, just for a moment. But even in the safety of the car, she knew this wasn't the end. No, this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would force her to confront the past she'd tried so hard to forget. But for now, she could only focus on the present. She and Ethan were safe. For tonight, that was enough. The warmth inside the house was a stark contrast to the bitter cold that had gripped the night just hours ago. Lily had never felt so disoriented. As she stepped into the large, lavish home, she could hardly believe what had just transpired. One moment, she and Ethan had been braving the storm in the streets of Seattle, and the next, they were standing in the entrance of an unfamiliar mansion, surrounded by expensive furniture, polished floors and distant walls that felt both inviting and alien. "Make yourselves comfortable," the man, whose name was Thomas Langford, said as he stepped inside behind them, removing his coat. His voice was calm, almost detached, but there was a genuine warmth in his eyes that didn't match the cold precision of his appearance. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a suit, his hair perfectly combed, his face striking but oddly distant. He looked every bit the part of the successful CEO that he was, yet there was something about him that made Lily wonder if he too was running from something. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to actually offer them shelter. When he had pulled over on that desolate street, she thought he was just another passerby, someone who would drive off in the rain, leaving her to face the cold alone. But no, he had stopped. He had opened the door. And now, here she was, in his home. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. She glanced down at Ethan, who was already making his way over to a couch, his small hands rubbing his eyes. Exhaustion had taken over, and he could barely stay awake. Thomas nodded, his gaze following Ethan for a moment before returning to Lily. "It's no trouble at all. You're welcome to stay for as long as you need. I'll have the guest room prepared for you both." Lily nodded, too weary to speak further. She hadn't realized how much the tension of the past hours had worn on her until she was suddenly granted this unexpected reprieve. She took Ethan's hand and guided him toward the couch, carefully settling him down. She needed to rest. Her body screamed for sleep. As she sank into a chair nearby, her eyes began to drift closed. For the first time in months, she didn't have to worry about the next meal or finding a place to sleep. For tonight, she and Ethan were safe. But even as her mind begged for sleep, her heart weighed heavy with the knowledge that safety, real, lasting safety, was something she could only dream of. She glanced up at Thomas, who had moved to the window, staring out at the darkened sky. She wondered what had driven him to stop, to offer his home to two strangers in need. She knew nothing about him, nothing about his life, yet she felt an odd sense of gratitude toward him. A gratitude she couldn't quite explain. Thomas turned away from the window and met her gaze. "I know this is all very sudden," he began, his voice softer now, "but I promise I won't ask anything of you. You and your son can stay here for as long as you need. You've been through a lot, and I can't imagine what it's like." Lily felt a knot tighten in her chest. There was something in his voice, something that resonated with the quiet pain she knew all too well. He wasn't just offering shelter. There was a sincerity to his words that made her wonder if, somehow, he understood her struggle. "I'm sorry to intrude on your life," Lily said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Thomas replied firmly, a subtle edge to his words. "You and your son are welcome here, Lily." She didn't know why, but his words, those simple, unexpected words, brought tears to her eyes. She quickly wiped them away, not wanting to seem weak in front of him. But it had been so long since anyone had shown her kindness without strings attached. As she sat there, lost in her own thoughts, she found herself wondering who Thomas Langford really was. He had offered them refuge, but what did he expect in return? What was driving him to help two strangers in the middle of a storm? Before she could ponder any further, Thomas broke the silence. "There's a bathroom down the hall if you'd like to freshen up. I'll have dinner prepared soon." Lily nodded, unable to muster more than a soft "thank you." She couldn't help but feel grateful for this unexpected moment of peace. But even in the quiet of the mansion, the ghosts of her past loomed. She had no idea how long they could stay, or what would happen once the storm passed. The safety she felt now was temporary. She was no longer on the street, but she knew deep down that the real battle, her battle, was far from over. She stood up and guided Ethan gently toward the bathroom, hoping that this brief moment of tranquility might offer them something more. She needed it, for both of them. They needed something to hold on to. As she closed the bathroom door behind her, she could hear the sound of Thomas moving about in the kitchen. She thought about the man who had come to her aid, who had shown them kindness when no one else had. There was something about him that she couldn't place, but for now, that mystery seemed less important than the fact that, for the first time in what felt like forever, they were safe. She just hoped it would last. But Lily had learned the hard way that peace was fleeting. She was right to be wary. The days that followed were a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Lily and Ethan settled into the guest room, which in itself felt like a dream after weeks of uncertainty and hardship. The soft bed, the warm blankets, the small comforts that most people took for granted. Lily had nearly forgotten what it felt like to sleep without fear. And Ethan, her sweet, innocent boy, seemed to thrive in this new space, running around with his energy renewed, his giggles filling the house. It was as though the weight of the world had lifted from his small shoulders, even if just for a while. But Lily knew better than to let her guard down completely. No matter how kind Thomas seemed, no matter how safe this house appeared, the past was never far behind her. It always lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike when she least expected it. One afternoon, as she was sitting in the living room, her hands resting on her lap as she absent-mindedly watched Ethan play, the doorbell rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. Thomas was in the kitchen, and she had no intention of answering it, but the sound of footsteps approaching the door made her heart skip a beat. The door swung open with a quiet creak, and she heard the voice of a man she hadn't expected to hear again. "Lily?" The voice was low and menacing, familiar yet filled with a sense of dread that sent a chill down her spine. "I know you're in there." Her blood ran cold as she stood up instinctively, her legs trembling. It was him, Lucas, her ex-husband. She moved quickly, rushing to the hallway where Thomas was standing at the door, his body stiff and tense as he faced Lucas. The man standing in front of them was a far cry from the gentle, well-dressed Thomas Langford. Lucas, with his unkempt appearance and eyes that burned with anger, was a living reminder of the past she desperately wanted to escape. "What do you want?" "Lucas?" Lily's voice trembled as she spoke, the old fear creeping up her spine. She hated the sound of her own voice in that moment, knowing it was a shadow of the woman she had once been, weak, vulnerable, terrified. Lucas smirked, a cold, calculating smile that sent shivers down her spine. "I want my family back." "Lily, you can't keep running forever. I'll do whatever it takes to get you back." Lily's pulse quickened, and she could hear Ethan's soft footsteps behind her, unaware of the threat standing at the door. She could see Thomas out of the corner of her eye, standing tall and resolute, his gaze fixed on Lucas, with an intensity that made the other man take a step back. "You're not welcome here," Thomas said firmly, his voice deep and commanding. "Lily is under my protection now." Lucas laughed bitterly. "Protection? You think you can just take her away from me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." Lily's stomach turned as Lucas's words cut through her. She had heard it all before. The threats, the promises, the lies. He had tried to control her once, to break her, and she had escaped. But now he was here, standing in front of her, threatening her all over again. She could feel the old terror crawling up her throat, the sensation of being trapped once more. Before she could say anything, Thomas stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Lucas. "If you don't leave now, I'll call the police," he said, his voice unwavering. Lucas scoffed, glancing briefly at Thomas before narrowing his eyes at Lily. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice venomous. "I'll get you back, Lily. You'll see. You can't hide forever." With that, Lucas turned and stormed off, slamming the door behind him. Lily stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears, the familiar panic setting in. But this time, she wasn't alone. Thomas turned to her, his face softening with concern. "Are you all right?" Lily shook her head, unable to find the words. She felt a wave of emotion crash over her, fear, anger, confusion, all of it tangled together in a knot that she couldn't untangle. The man who had once been her partner, the one who had hurt her in ways she still couldn't fully comprehend, was back, and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. Ethan had appeared behind her, sensing the tension in the air. "Mum, who was that man?" Lily knelt down, brushing a hand through his messy hair as she pulled him into a hug. "It's okay, baby. He's just someone from my past. He won't hurt us anymore." But even as she said the words, she wasn't sure if she believed them. She had escaped Lucas before, but he had always found a way back into her life, back into her mind. And now he was more dangerous than ever. Thomas placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch comforting in a way she hadn't expected. "You don't have to worry about him, Lily. I won't let him near you or Ethan." But Lily knew better. The peace they had found here, this brief reprieve, was fragile. The storm outside might have subsided for now, but the true tempest was still waiting on the horizon, and this time she wasn't sure if they could outrun it. As the night settled in, and the shadows of the mansion grew longer, Lily sat on the edge of the guest bed, her hands trembling. She wanted to believe Thomas. She wanted to believe that for once she had found a safe place for her and Ethan. But with Lucas out there, she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were about to be torn apart once again. And she didn't know if they could survive it this time. The door to the room creaked open, and Thomas stepped inside, his expression gentle but serious. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "I'm not going to let him take you from me, from us." Lily looked up at him, her heart heavy with both gratitude and fear. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if they would win this battle, but in that moment she believed Thomas. And that belief, fragile as it was, felt like the only thing keeping her grounded. But the storm was far from over. Lily sat by the window, her gaze lost in the heavy rain outside, watching as it streaked down the glass in rivulets. The mansion, with all its warmth and comforts, felt like a temporary oasis, something too fragile to trust. She had felt that before, the false sense of security, the fleeting hope that had always crumbled in her hands. But for the first time in a long time, she was afraid of what might happen if she allowed herself to hope too much. Ethan, oblivious to the tension that had seeped into the house, was playing with the toys Thomas had provided. He laughed, a soft, pure sound, his tiny hands busy with his makeshift creations. Lily smiled at him, her heart aching with the love she had for him. She'd give anything to protect him from the dangers of this world, especially from the man who had hurt them both so many times before. Thomas had been a constant presence in their lives since the day he'd taken them in. He'd kept his promise to help them, to offer protection, and Lily had learned to trust him. But trust, she knew, could be easily shattered, and the more time she spent in his home, the more she wondered what his motivations truly were. Why had he helped them in the first place? What did he want from her? That night, after dinner, Thomas had sat down across from her in the sitting room, his usual detached air replaced by something more vulnerable. He shared his own pain with her, not the calculated, polished version of himself that he showed the world, but the raw truth of his past. His voice had trembled as he spoke of his parents, of their untimely deaths, and the hollow void that had followed. His words lingered in the air, and Lily had realized, with a jolt, that he too was running from something. In a way, they were both trying to escape. The following days had been filled with small, meaningful gestures. Thomas helping her with grocery shopping, Ethan's delighted squeals when Thomas would push him on the swing in the backyard, moments that, in their simplicity, brought a quiet kind of joy. But in the back of her mind, the specter of Lucas never went away. He was out there somewhere, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The legal battle was inevitable. It was something Lily had been dreading since the moment Lucas had shown up at the house. He was relentless, a man who believed that everything and everyone belonged to him. The papers he had served her years ago, demanding custody of Ethan, still sat in a drawer back at the shelter where she'd lived before. They were a reminder of his power, of his ability to break her, of his claim over her life. But now, with Thomas in the picture, the battle was different. She didn't know if he could protect them from Lucas, but he was determined to try. It was a cold, grey morning when Thomas pulled her aside after breakfast, his expression serious. "I've hired investigators and lawyers," he said quietly. "We're going to make sure Lucas can't touch you or Ethan. He'll never be able to hurt you again." Lily felt a tightness in her chest, both a wave of relief and a deep, suffocating fear. She didn't want to be indebted to Thomas. She didn't want to rely on anyone else ever again, not after everything she had been through. But the truth was, she needed him. She needed someone who would fight for them. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice catching in her throat. "I don't know what we would do without you." Thomas hesitated for a moment before speaking again, his tone softer now. "You don't have to worry. I won't let him hurt you again. I'll do whatever it takes." But even as he spoke those words, Lily's heart clenched with doubt. She had heard promises like this before, from Lucas, from others who had told her they would protect her, and each time those promises had fallen apart. Could she really trust Thomas? Could she trust anyone? That afternoon, Lily sat down to go over the documents Thomas had given her, papers from the lawyer, testimonies, background checks. It was overwhelming, the weight of it all, and it made her heart ache. She had never wanted to be caught in this kind of fight. She had never wanted her life to be defined by Lucas or the years of torment she had endured. She wanted a simple life for herself and Ethan, something stable and peaceful. Was that too much to ask? But the more she read through the papers, the more she realized that this was no longer about survival. It was about reclaiming her life. It was about finally having the strength to say no to Lucas and to take control of her future. That night, as she tucked Ethan into bed, she kissed his forehead softly, whispering a promise to him. "We're going to be okay, Ethan. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you again." And yet, as she pulled the covers up around him, a voice inside her couldn't shake the doubt that lingered. She had said the same thing so many times before. How many times had she promised him safety, only for that promise to slip away like sand through her fingers? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Lily opened it to find Thomas standing there, his expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her pulse quicken. "I've arranged everything," he said quietly. "We're going to move forward with the legal process. The sooner we start, the sooner this will be over." She nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The storm had been calm for days, but she could feel it building again. It wasn't just Lucas that scared her now. It was the fear that she might lose everything she had finally found. She could sense that the end of this fight was still far off, and there would be more battles ahead. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. His eyes were intense, but there was something different in the way he looked at her, as if he too was grappling with the weight of what had already passed and what was yet to come. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said, his voice low. "You have me, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily allowed herself to believe him. She had wanted to keep her distance, to shield herself from getting too close to anyone. But she knew that it wasn't just for her that she was fighting anymore. It was for Ethan, and she would do whatever it took to protect him. "Let's finish this," she whispered, more to herself than to Thomas, but he heard her nonetheless. And so, they prepared. The fight was only beginning. Lily awoke to a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a deep, unsettling sense of anticipation. The air in the mansion seemed heavier, as though it too was bracing for something inevitable. Ethan, still deep in his dreams, stirred beside her, his small hand clutching her sleeve like a lifeline. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding her breath since they arrived here until now, until the storm had started gathering again, this time from within, and the threat of Lucas loomed ever larger. The phone call had come that morning. The news that they had been waiting for. Lucas was filing for custody. Again, and this time, things were different. Thomas had gathered the evidence. The legal team was on their side, and Lily had been told to prepare for the fight of her life. She wasn't sure she was ready, but there was no choice. The stakes had never been higher. Sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by the scent of fresh coffee and the hum of the house waking up around her, Lily stared blankly at the papers Thomas had handed her. The documents were all too familiar, the words a cruel reminder of the nightmare that had been her life for so long. Custody battle, visitation rights, Lucas's allegations, false but damaging. She hated it all. "Ethan's still sleeping," Thomas said as he stepped into the room, his voice gentle, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart skip. It was as though he could see straight through her, past the tough exterior she had spent so long building, straight to the raw vulnerability beneath. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath and ran a hand through her hair, trying to focus. The world felt blurry, every thought weighed down by the fear of losing Ethan, the one thing in this world she couldn't bear to lose. Thomas sat down across from her, his eyes soft with concern. "We'll get through this, Lily, I promise." Lily looked up at him, her heart heavy with doubt. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this wasn't another fleeting promise. But the truth was, she didn't know if she could go through another round of this. She had spent years running, escaping, fighting just to keep her son safe. And now, the same man who had broken her was back, determined to take her son from her. "I don't know if I can do this," Lily confessed quietly, her voice barely audible as she looked down at her hands. "What if he wins? What if I lose Ethan? I don't have the strength for this anymore." Thomas's gaze softened even further, and for a moment she thought he might reach across the table to comfort her, but he held back. Instead, he leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm. "You don't have to do this alone. You're not alone, Lily." His words hit her like a wave. She hadn't realized just how much she had been carrying, how much she had been hiding from everyone, including herself. For so long, her world had been just her and Ethan struggling to survive, trying to outrun the darkness. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone who truly believed in her, someone who would stand beside her when the weight of it all threatened to crush her. For the first time since she had arrived at Thomas's home, she felt something shift deep within her. Maybe this wasn't just about surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, she could finally have something more, something real. But before she could say anything, the doorbell rang, cutting through the heavy silence that had settled in the room. A cold chill ran down Lily's spine as she glanced at Thomas. He stood up immediately, his eyes narrowing as he moved toward the door, his protective instincts kicking in. Lily's heart raced as she followed him into the entryway. Who could it be? Her mind immediately went to Lucas, and a tight knot formed in her stomach. But it wasn't him. It wasn't Lucas at all. Standing at the door, staring back at Thomas, was a woman, a lawyer by the looks of her. She was dressed in a dark suit, her expression sharp, professional. In her hand, she held a folder, one that Lily immediately recognized as legal paperwork. "I'm sorry to intrude," the woman said, her tone polite but businesslike. "My name is Elizabeth Fisher. I'm here to discuss the custody case." Lily felt the floor beneath her feet shift. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, it felt like too much to bear. The woman glanced at her, offering a tight smile before turning back to Thomas. "I've reviewed the situation thoroughly," Elizabeth continued. "And while we're preparing for the hearing, there are a few matters that need to be addressed immediately." Thomas's jaw tightened. "We're prepared, whatever it takes." Lily couldn't find her voice. She couldn't process the whirlwind that was spiraling around her. Instead, she stepped back slightly, feeling dizzy as the weight of what was about to happen pressed down on her chest. Her heart pounded in her ears as she tried to steady herself, her thoughts racing. She didn't want to go through this again. She didn't want to stand in a courtroom and have her past dissected, her pain laid bare for strangers to see. But as the woman handed Thomas a stack of papers, a cold, hard reality began to sink in. This wasn't just about Lucas. This wasn't just about her. This was about Ethan. And for him, she would do anything. As the morning passed, the reality of the legal battle began to feel even more pressing. The hours dragged on as they discussed strategies, loopholes, and the evidence they had gathered. Lily listened, absorbed, but her mind was clouded by the weight of what this fight would demand. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Ethan, and that made everything sharper, more urgent. That night, after a long day of planning and paperwork, Thomas came to her, his face as weary as hers. He sat beside her on the couch, the space between them small, yet it felt monumental. "You're stronger than you think, Lily," he said quietly, his voice steady. "You've made it this far, and I won't let Lucas take him from you. Not now, not ever." Lily turned to him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and fear. "I don't know if I can do this. I've already lost so much." Thomas took her hand gently in his grip firm. "But you haven't lost everything. Not yet. And you're not alone anymore." For the first time in a long time, Lily felt something warm stir within her, a flicker of hope. So fragile it almost broke her heart. She wasn't alone. Maybe this time, just maybe, she could win. She had to, for Ethan, for the life they both deserved. As the night drew on, she knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that they would fight it together. And that made all the difference. The days blurred into each other as Lily, Thomas, and the team of lawyers prepared for the upcoming custody battle. Each day brought new challenges, endless paperwork, meetings, and the constant pressure to stay focused. Lily had always been a survivor, But this was different. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Ethan, the little boy who had been through so much already. She couldn't let Lucas win, not this time. The house had become their haven, but even in the safety of its walls, there was an unspoken tension. Thomas was working tirelessly to build the case against Lucas, using every resource at his disposal to ensure that the truth came to light. But the closer they got to the hearing, the heavier Lily's heart felt. She wanted to believe that they could win. She wanted to believe that they could build a future here, but the shadows of her past kept creeping in. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lucas's face, his angry, cold eyes, the way he had tried to control her life. The fear that had ruled her every decision for years now gnawed at her from the inside, threatening to break her resolve. How had she let herself get caught in his web? How had she allowed him to take so much from her? But then, as if sensing her growing anxiety, Ethan would come to her, his small hands reaching for hers, pulling her out of the darkness. She would hold him close, breathing in the sweet, innocent scent of his hair, and for a brief moment, the world felt right. She had him. He was all that mattered now. That afternoon, Thomas called her into his study. His face was serious as he gestured for her to sit across from him. Lily felt a wave of dread wash over her. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that the final preparations for the hearing would soon be upon them. "How are you holding up?" Thomas asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. He had always been gentle with her, even when the world felt too harsh. But there was something different in his eyes now. She could see the weight of the responsibility he had taken on, the commitment he had made to her and Ethan. "I'm scared," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what Lucas is capable of. He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes steady and unwavering. "I know, Lily, but that's exactly why we're fighting this. We won't let him have Ethan. We've got evidence, and we've got the law on our side. You've got more than just me in your corner. You've got a whole team working to make sure you and Ethan are safe." Lily nodded, trying to take comfort in his words, but the fear was still there, gnawing at her insides. She had never allowed herself to hope too much. Life had taught her that hope often led to disappointment. But for Ethan, for the little boy who deserved a future free from fear, she had to try. She had to fight, had to. As they continued to talk, the door to the study opened, and Ethan walked in, his small feet pattering softly on the hardwood floor. He looked up at them, his wide eyes filled with innocence and curiosity. "Mom?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Are we going to be okay?" Lily's heart clenched in her chest. She smiled softly, though her eyes betrayed the uncertainty she felt. "Yes, baby, we're going to be okay." Thomas looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. But then, without a word, he stood up and walked over to Ethan, crouching down to his level. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice low but steady. "You're safe here, Ethan," Thomas said. "I promise you that, and we'll make sure you stay safe, no matter what happens." Ethan's small face brightened at the reassurance, and Lily felt a surge of warmth flood her chest. This was it. This was the moment when she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had something to fight for. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was love. It was the promise of a life where her son could be happy, where they could be free from the terror that had haunted them for so long. But even as she held on to that fragile hope, the doorbell rang, and Lily's heart skipped a beat. She knew that whoever was at the door would bring more news, more challenges. She had been bracing herself for the worst, but the moment she stepped out into the hallway and saw the stern face of a man standing in the doorway, her stomach dropped. The man didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, his eyes scanning her with an almost cold indifference. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "I'm here on behalf of Lucas," the man said, his voice clipped and formal. "I've come to deliver a formal request for visitation rights." Lily's blood ran cold. The legal battle had only just begun, and now this. Her hands shook as she took the papers from the man's hand, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "Visitation rights," she repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." The man didn't flinch at her reaction. It's part of the custody proceedings. Your ex-husband believes it's time he has access to his son. These papers are for your lawyer. Lily slammed the door shut behind him, the weight of the papers burning in her hands. She could feel the walls closing in, the very ground beneath her feet slipping away. Was this how it was going to be? Every time she thought she had found a moment of peace, Lucas would show up, dragging her back into the nightmare. But then she looked over at Thomas, who had been silent through it all, watching her closely. His expression was unreadable, but the warmth in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was there, and for the first time in a long time, Lily allowed herself to lean into that support. "We'll handle this," Thomas said quietly, his voice firm with resolve. "We won't let him take Ethan." Lily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. For Ethan, for the future they were trying to build, she would fight. She would not let Lucas tear them apart again. Not now, not ever. But as the storm outside raged on, Lily knew that the final battle was yet to come, and this time she wouldn't back down. The fight for their future had just begun. The morning of the court hearing arrived with an unsettling quiet, as though the world outside had held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Lily stood in front of the mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the hem of her blouse, trying to steady herself. Her reflection stared back at her, vulnerable, uncertain, yet determined. She had fought so hard to get to this moment, and today it would all come to a head. Ethan was still asleep in his room, a peaceful expression on his face, as if the storm that had gripped their lives for so long had never touched him. Lily didn't want to wake him, didn't want to pull him into the chaos that would unfold later. For now he was safe, wrapped in innocence, far from the courtroom and the nightmare she was about to face. She felt a hand on her shoulder, a comforting presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Thomas. His touch was steady, like the calm after a storm. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "You don't have to do this alone, Lily." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She wanted to believe him. She needed to. But in her heart, there was still the gnawing fear that, despite all they had done, despite everything Thomas had done for them, Lucas would find a way to tear them apart. The man was ruthless, and Lily knew all too well how far he would go to get what he wanted. "I don't want to lose him," Lily said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to lose Ethan." Thomas stepped in front of her, his gaze unwavering, his eyes filled with understanding and something more, something deeper. He reached out, lifting her chin gently with his fingers, so that she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "You won't lose him. I won't let that happen. I'm with you, Lily. We'll make sure of it." Lily's heart squeezed in her chest. She had never imagined that someone like Thomas would be there for her in this way, someone who saw beyond her struggles, beyond her pain. He had given her so much more than shelter. He had given her a chance for a future she had once believed was impossible. The sound of Ethan stirring from his room broke the moment, and Lily turned quickly, her heart lifting with the thought of her son. She went to him, opening the door quietly, finding him rubbing his eyes and sitting up in bed, his small form still sleepy but awake. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made everything worth it. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was soft, groggy. "Is it time for the hearing?" Lily smiled, brushing the hair out of his eyes. "No, baby, you stay here and relax. Mom has to go take care of something, okay?" Ethan nodded, his little hands tugging at the covers. "I want to go with you." Lily hesitated for a moment. She knew that Ethan didn't fully understand what was happening, but there was no way she could explain the complexities of custody battles to him. It was too heavy a burden for his small shoulders. "You'll stay here with Thomas, okay? I'll be back soon." His face fell slightly, but he trusted her. "Okay, Mom." She leaned down and kissed his forehead, her heart breaking a little as she left him in the safety of the room. She knew he didn't fully understand what was at stake, but she also knew that everything she was doing, every sacrifice she made, was for him. She would never let Lucas take him from her. Not again. As she and Thomas left the house, heading to the courthouse, Lily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had been through so much to get here, and yet, as they walked into the imposing building, it all felt surreal. This was it, the moment where everything would either fall apart or finally come together. She didn't know which it would be, but she had to believe that the truth would win in the end. The courtroom was cold and sterile, filled with the quiet murmur of attorneys and their clients. Lily's hands clenched together, her nerves on edge as they waited for the hearing to begin. She could feel Lucas's presence before she saw him, the familiar coldness radiating from the man who had once been her husband. He sat on the other side of the room, his eyes locked on hers with an unsettling intensity. Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She could feel Thomas standing beside her, a steady force in the storm. He hadn't let go of her hand since they entered, and that small act of support was more comforting than anything else in the room. She wasn't alone. As the proceedings began, the tension in the room escalated. Lucas's lawyer presented his case first, using every angle they could find to make Lily appear unfit. They spoke of her past, of the hardships she had endured, of the times she had struggled. Each word felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of everything she had tried to escape. But as the accusations flew, Lily remained silent, her focus on the one person who mattered, Ethan. Then it was Thomas's turn. He stood up, his presence commanding, and Lily couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope as he walked to the front of the courtroom. His words were calm but powerful as he spoke of Lily's character, of the woman he had come to know, of her strength, her resilience, and her love for Ethan. He didn't hide behind legal jargon or empty promises. He spoke the truth of what she had endured, of the battles she had fought, and of the mother she had become. As he finished, the room fell silent. The judge, who had been listening intently, leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room. For a moment, the world seemed to stop as Lily held her breath. Finally, the judge spoke, his voice even and impartial. The evidence presented today, along with the testimony, leads me to conclude that custody of Ethan Langford will remain with his mother, Lily Langford. Lily's heart stopped. She had heard those words, but they didn't register at first. Was it real? Was this the moment when everything had finally turned in their favor? The gavel slammed, and the judge's ruling was official. Lily felt her knees weaken, but Thomas was there, his steady hand on her arm, supporting her as the room erupted in a quiet, almost reverent murmur. She didn't know how to react. After everything, after all the years of pain, of running, of fighting, this was it. She had won. They had won. She turned to look at Thomas. His face soft but filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. He had kept his promise. He had fought for them. "Thank you," Lily whispered, her voice cracking. Thomas smiled, his eyes shining with something more than just victory. "You did this, Lily. You're the one who never gave up." And in that moment, as the weight of the last few years finally lifted off her shoulders, Lily realized that this was the beginning of something new, something real, a life she could build with Ethan, a life free from fear and pain, a life where they could finally be safe. As they walked out of the courtroom side by side, Lily felt something stir inside her, hope, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a fragile, fleeting thing. It felt like something solid, something worth fighting for, and they had finally won.